Presentation of dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho.
Coming up, companies all over the world tout their fair trade products. But what does that term actually mean? And how can you tell if you're buying such an item? We'll talk with an expert in the fair trade movement next on Dialogue. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Marcia Franklin. Many people now look at labels when they buy an item, be that a piece of clothing or a piece of fruit. Some consumers want to see the words "Made in America." Others are looking for organic, and still others are interested in whether the product is marked fair trade. But what does that term mean, and how can you be sure that what you're buying is in fact the result of fair trade? With me to answer those questions and others is Doug Dirks. Mr. Dirks works for 10,000 Villages, a nonprofit fair trade retailer that traces its roots back to 1946, when a Mennonite woman, Edna Ruth Byler, started selling crafts from Puerto Rican artisans to her friends. There was so much interest, she started a business that became 10,000 Villages. More than 60 years later, the company buys products from 130 different artisan groups in 38 countries. It sells them online at more than 75 stores across the United States. Mr. Dirks has worked for 10,000 Villages for more than 25 years in a variety of positions, including Marketing Director and Executive Director of 10,000 Villages in Canada. He's also the past chair of the board of the Fair Trade Federation. Today, he travels the world visiting artisan groups that sell to 10,000 Villages and speaking to Americans about fair trade issues. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And one note, because this is a taped program, there will be no phone calls. Well, first of all, welcome to Boise. I understand it's your first visit here.
That's right.
Short of just driving by. Let's start with the basics. I think for many people, they're not quite clear what fair trade is or what it means. Can you encapsulate that for folks?
Yeah, I think so. For us at 10,000 Villages, it means that we meet people in developing countries who otherwise are unemployed or severely underemployed. Then we talk to them about what kinds of skills and abilities they have, whether they can make a product that we might be able to sell in our marketplace. And really important to us in that whole process is when we meet an artisan and start talking to them about a product, we talk, number one, about what do they consider to be a fair price for their product. And so that includes things like, what is a fair wage in your community? How much do the raw materials cost? How much will it cost you to be able to afford to send your children to school? How much would it cost if someone in your family got ill and you had to go see a doctor? You should be able to afford to pay for those kinds of things. And we want to make sure that if we start a business relationship with you and begin buying your products as an artisan, that you can earn enough money to take care of the basic needs of your family.
We've got some photos of artisans that you do work with. That's the pricing part of fair trade, the wage issue. And actually, I meant to ask you, what would be considered a fair wage? Can we translate that into dollars, for instance?
Well, it varies from place to place. I was just in Bangladesh and India with our tour group 2 weeks ago. And in Bangladesh, for instance, women who make this kind of handmade paper book will
wait to hold that up again because we didn't quite see
will
that.
earn anywhere from $5 to $10 a day, depending on how busy they are and how good they are at their particular job. And compared to a local person who works in the field, for instance, who might earn $1 or $1.50 a day, that's an extremely good wage. It's better than a local elementary school teacher would earn. And so we try to compare locally what other people might earn and try to make sure that they fit sort of in the average there.
Now, that's the wage part of it, as I mentioned, but there are also some other principles of fair trade, sometimes called the FINE principles, which is an acronym. And they have to do not only with fair wages, but also things, yes, like a safe and healthy workplace. The right to form cooperatives or unions if you want, not to discriminate in terms of, only hiring from your own family. And that the children should have completed school in whatever country, whatever age that is. So talk a little bit about that. Those must be very difficult to monitor sometimes, some of these additional principles.
Yeah, they are. What we do at 10,000 Villages is we build up long-term, consistent relations. We visit often. We actually have people on the ground in many of the countries where we work who can visit from time to time. And so we feel like that's really important in the process. But we've also found that it's not all that difficult, because when you start working with someone who doesn't normally have work, and they understand that you're committed to them for the long haul and want to work together and actually together want to make sort of life easier for them, it's fairly easy to talk to people about things like gender equity, caring for your environment. I mean, they themselves don't want to get sick, and they also don't want to harm the environment that their neighbors live in. I mean, that's just being a good neighbor. So,
because there are environmental principles as well, things like not using genetically modified ingredients.
That would, especially for food products.
Right, and also safety issues with maybe like if they're dyeing products, using safe dyes.
Yeah, and that's where we get involved more often. Is a lot of textiles and papers, for instance, that we buy are dyed. And so you want to use azo-free dyes, you want to use dyes that aren't going to be harmful to the skin of the people that are using it or to their respiratory system. But you also want to be concerned about wastewater and how you recapture that and reuse it and treat it so that it doesn't pollute the environment, so the water is still safe. A whole bunch of things like that it's all part of, it's really being part of a good sort of business person and a citizenship in the community where these people live.
So, there has been some criticism of people who say that this is imposing standards, imposing Western whims on groups that, let's just take child labor, for instance. We're not talking about slavery now, but there are many countries in which children are put to work. Yeah. And so how do you answer those criticisms that, hey, why are you paying them more, but you're also asking them to do these things?
Yeah. Well, with child labor, obviously we don't want to be involved in situations where children are bonded or are in essence enslaved to somebody. I mean, and unfortunately that happens. I mean, really poor families, and they have children and they don't have enough money to put food on the table, they send their kids to work, and sometimes they end up working in terrible circumstances. And so we're definitely opposed to that kind of thing. On the other hand, many of the people that we work with work in small family workshops. And they also probably do some farming on the side. We've found that when they earn enough income to send their kids to school, that's almost always priority number one. They will make sure their kids go to school. But when the kids come home from school, they're still expected to help with the family business. So they do chores. To me, that's not much different than my son mowing the lawn or my girls having to clean the house when they come home after school. So at that level, we feel like, well, that's okay. I mean, if somebody is in the family and they're learning how to do the family business, and that's after their school day is done, that's okay. I mean, that's not much different than what I would do in my family. But you definitely don't want a situation where essentially people are forced to choose and say, I'm so poor that my son has to work for me all the time and he cannot go to school.
And so the larger issue, again, this criticism that you're kind of imposing a value system on the groups with which you work. How do you answer that? There are some people who feel like the free market system should just be what it is when you're talking about trade. Yeah. Well, and truthfully, that's largely what we do. I mean, we don't have to go into a situation and say to people, you need health care, you need education for your kids. People know this. They're not dumb. I mean, just because they're poor, they're not dumb. And we've found that when we help them to have an opportunity to earn a regular income, they will make the decisions that are best for their families. We don't have to coach them in those kind of things. We might have to help them to find and identify some of the resources that they don't normally have access to, but it's not us identifying. Another thing we get criticized for is that by asking people to design a product for our market, that we're somehow harming their culture. I mean, it's possible to do that, but most of the artisans that I know, for instance, artisans in India that are wood carvers and stone carvers and have been wood carvers and stone carvers for literally 500-600 years, long traditions of culture and art and that kind of stuff. They say to me, look,
you don't understand my culture. You don't understand my tradition. You would never buy my art because that's not part of your culture. Tell me what I should make so that you can buy it, so I can earn enough money so that I actually have the time and the resources to practice my traditional art. I do that here in India, and I do that with some of my patrons and the people who appreciate that kind of stuff. You go home and look after your own culture, because, you know, and from their opinion, we don't do a very good job of that. And so I tend to agree with them that, you know, I really don't have as much influence over them as I think I might. But I do feel like I have a responsibility in the world we live in to share some of my economic resources and find a way for them to earn a decent income so that they can, in fact, carry on their tradition.
We did have a question come in on our Facebook page, and I'm sure that this is not an unfamiliar question to you. The person writes, some companies claim to believe and practice fair trade, but are they really? And how do we know that what we buy really goes directly to the people who created that wooden giraffe or those coffee beans?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, you make site visits,
Yeah.
it sounds like,
Yeah.
but other larger companies are now getting into this.
Yeah.
How do we know? There was recently a controversy with Victoria's Secret that was marketing a line of both organic and fair trade cotton, and it was found that there was what appeared to be forced child labor going on in the field in Africa.
Yeah. Well, the way we would address that is there's a couple of different ways in the larger fair trade world. If you're buying commodities like coffee or chocolate, you can look for a fair trade mark.
Right. There's some logos.
Yes, and it's an international symbol that is recognizable in many countries around the world, and that essentially means that third-party inspectors have gone to those particular coffee co-ops, and some of them are on the screen right now. And have certified that the coffee is grown on a farm where good farming practices are taken care of, where the farmers have received what's considered to be a fair trade price, that kind of thing. In handicrafts, there isn't a certification system like that because handicrafts are very diverse. They often sold in very small quantities, and inspections like that would be really expensive. So we've been part of a movement to start a number of fair trade organizations. There's an organization called the World Fair Trade Organization that we're a member of. It's about 500 members around the world. Another organization here in North America called the Fair Trade Federation. We've established a number of fair trade guidelines that members are expected to live by. We have a number of inspection and auditing systems that help to make sure that happens. But all of that, I mean, a lot of that is technicalities. And what does it really mean on the ground for the artisan or the farmer? And for us, fair trade comes down to building real long-term relationships where we actually know the people. And so, from my point of view, if people doubt whether or not the artisans, for instance, at Dunia Marketplace in Boise or at a 10,000 Villages store somewhere else in the U.S., whether or not those benefits are actually getting to the producer, I say, look, if you want to know if you're buying handmade paper in our store in Philadelphia and you want to know whether or not those artisans are benefiting, I can tell you who they are, I can tell you where they live, you can go and visit them personally, and you ask them whether or not they like the fair trade transaction. And inevitably, I'm not afraid of doing that. And I think that's the way we should
So other
operate.
Companies, maybe if people have questions, they should ask those same sort of questions
and
to
I
the
think
other
that's
companies.
I think that's a responsibility of us as consumers. When I'm spending my money, I want to make sure that if you're the vendor, that you're using my money responsibly and wisely, and that you're not taking advantage of somebody else. So I think it's my responsibility as a consumer to ask my retailer or whoever it is, do you know where this came from? Do you know who made it? Were they treated well? Were they paid well in the process? That's a tough question.
And in one of those pictures we saw go by, it looked like there were visitors, and you mentioned you take people on tours. So people can sign up to go, at least with 10,000 Villages, to go visit some of these artisans. Interesting. Now, we saw some silver go by in that video, and I wanted to ask you about that because I mean, you could take this to the nth degree, but how do you know that, even if say the ring is made by somebody local, but what about the, if they're using
where'd the silver come from?
Correct. Was that mined by, children or in bad conditions?
Well, that is an issue. And how far do you trace raw materials? I was just in Peru in October, and we buy silver jewelry from two organizations in Peru. One is called ALPA and one is called Manos Amigas. Both of them are working at a program where they are partnering with some mines in Peru who traditionally have really crummy reputations. But they're working with a couple of specific mines where they're hoping to change the labor standards and how people work in mines. And there's two big issues in Peru, and we need to be upfront with people about this. There has traditionally been a lot of child labor in mines, and there's been a lot of trouble with basically lung diseases because of people working underground and in terrible situations. But both ALPA and Manos Amigas are aware of this and are actively working with a couple of mine managers that are open to talking about this kind of thing, and not everybody is. The situation is not fixed by any stretch. But at least it seems like we're on the road to making it a lot better. Now, the problem with that is then the silver becomes more expensive.
Yeah.
Okay, and our jewelry gets more expensive. And so how do you deal with that in the marketplace? And that's a huge issue for us to deal with.
Maybe.
But we feel like that's one that's worth working at.
Right, because one of the questions I was going to ask you is, since fair trade products do have a bit of a premium on them, are these just products that the wealthy can buy, or are we starting to see all sectors?
Well, I don't think so. I mean,
purchase fair trade.
Yeah, if you walk into Dunio Marketplace here, or you walk into a 10,000 Villages store, you'll find products anywhere from $2 to $300. So there's a wide range of products that people can buy. And when we survey our customers, for instance, that are coming in and out of our stores, they're not predominantly wealthy people. They're people from all walks of life. And one of the things that's really impressed me about our customers is a lot of them come in first because they see a product that they think they would like to buy. Almost always when we ask them, why did you come back and why did you bring your friend with you, is because I learned something about the story behind the product. And I want to come back and I want to support the artisans that make these products because that story is important to me.
We are seeing video of Dunio Marketplace, which is the fair trade store in Boise. It used to be a 10,000 Villages store. The store wanted to carry more local products, such as we see the hat the lady was trying on, made by refugees. And I assume they still carry 10,000 Villages crafts. I assume that's okay with you. There's to have that broadening and to be taking care of the local community.
Yeah, that's entirely okay. We've found over the years, and we've been doing this kind of thing for more than 50 years, if you have a store that is locally rooted and has a strong support system locally, they often are much healthier than other stores because you've got local folks who know what's going on in the community, they've got friends. It just makes for a better local business. And
how do you answer the question that people may have, like, well, why don't we take care of our own? You know, what about fair trade in the United States? There are people that are needy and maybe have...
There are people that are doing that kind of thing. I mean, since I've been here just yesterday, I heard about a number of people that are working with homeless people, with people who are refugees from other countries. A number of our stores, the way we deal with this in North America at 10,000 Villages is each of the stores has some latitude to work with local organizations. That's up to them. Our only requirement is that they're making fair trade purchases in North America as well. And so a lot of our stores buy from a group in Denver called the Women's Bean Project, which is working with women who used to be in the sex trade or are coming out of homeless situations. And there's a group that makes candles like that.
So there is fair trade going on in our country as well. Yeah. And I wanted to make sure that we mentioned that while crafts are some of the things that people immediately associate with fair trade, the big markets are in. You've got a coffee here and chocolate. Yes. And the growth is pretty extraordinary. Just last year, 75% growth in the purchase of fair trade products. Now, I do need to ask you about the certification process a little bit more because there's a bit of a brouhaha going on. And that is the Fair Trade USA, which the logos we saw, maybe we can put those back up again, which certifies fair trade products like coffee and chocolate. Again, crafts aren't certified. They have broadened their qualifications, so to speak, or their tent. And so they're going to be putting their seal on products that come from much larger plantations, for instance, and sometimes with maybe little as 10 to 20% fair trade ingredients.
Yeah.
So has this created a tension within the fair trade community a little bit?
Yeah, big tension.
Okay.
and the traditional fair traders, which tend to be smaller organizations working directly with coffee farmers, for instance, in places like Colombia and Tanzania and Peru, they're really upset by this because they say, look, fair trade is built upon building relationships with these farmers and helping them to build up their farms so that they're more productive, so that they can take care of their families and all this kind of stuff. And now they're saying, well, if Fair Trade USA is going to sort of take this fair trade groundwork and they're going to give the fair trade seal to a huge plantation in Brazil, they're upset about that, because then that coffee is going to appear on the grocery store shelf with the same fair trade certification mark as from the little organization that's working directly with a farmer, and they feel like they're going to have a competitive advantage. That's one issue.
Yeah, right. But there are a lot of poor people working on those large plantations too, and if the plantation agrees to abide by the principles of fair trade, no GMOs, the pesticide use down, the safe working place, is that okay?
And paying the price.
And paying the price. Then is it okay, or is the jury still out?
There's a wide range of opinion on this.
Yeah.
I mean, personally, I feel like it's okay, because from my point of view, maybe it's not as good as working directly with a farmer who owns a small plot of land in Colombia, but if it increases the sale of fair trade coffee by, like last year, by 75%, and that benefits another 200,000 people who are working on plantations as farmers, and they get better wages and they can provide a better education for their kids, that's a really good thing. It's maybe different, and people are going to have to work out their differences and figure out how to agree on this kind of stuff. So I mean, there's some controversy over this, because fair trade coffee is now, it's going to show up in Walmart and Costco and all this kind of stuff. But from my point of view, that's okay. I mean, ideally, everything you buy in a Walmart shelf would be fair trade. That's not going to happen tomorrow, but maybe this is a start.
So is there a maybe potential problem in the future with what we've seen in the environmental movement that's called greenwashing? Fair trade washing, or I don't know what
that's a big fear.
term would be.
Fair washing is starting to crop up.
that somehow the term would be co-opted, and people would think they'd be buying fair trade products, but they aren't really.
Yeah, well, then that's the fear with the plantation, and what's happening. One of the big reasons plantations are really controversial is that people know farmers who used to own a farm, a coffee farm. And when coffee prices were really low 10 years ago, 40, 50 cents a pound, a lot of farmers lost their land because they couldn't afford to pay the loans that they took out to pay for fertilizer and pesticide and seeds and all this kind of stuff. Those coffee farmers lost their land. The plantations picked up the land at a cheap price. Those coffee farmers are now coffee pickers on a plantation.
Right, so they used to be individual owners.
And so now they're sort of the lowest of the low on the plantation. And the fear is will the fair trade premium, will that actually trickle down to those coffee pickers? Will they benefit from it?
It sounds like if you are a person looking for a potential job, that in years to come, there will be positions for certifiers, for people to go out and travel the world and do this. A growing job market, so to speak, in certification. Where do you see, as we start to wrap up here, we have a couple minutes left, where do you see this movement going? You've been in it for more than a quarter of a century, 25 years, and you've traveled the world. What's next for fair trade? Where do you see the movement going?
Well, there's what I think is next and what I hope is next. I mean, fair trade is picking up speed, and that even for 10,000 villages, our sales are growing last year at about 13%, which for us in the current economy is phenomenal. We feel really good about that. We're really fortunate. And we think there's lots of opportunity out there, largely because when we talk to our customers, it seems like there are a lot of consumers who in tough times want to make sure they spend their money responsibly, and they want to make sure that the people who they give their money to spend their money responsibly. So they're asking a lot more questions. Where does it come from? Who makes it? Are they being treated well? That's a good sign for the future. What I would hope is that as fair trade expands, more and more businesses will take a look at this and say, hey, our consumers are actually asking for this. So we should start thinking about making our sneakers in a fair trade shoe factory. We should start thinking about making our iPhones in a fair trade electronics factory. We should start thinking about making the seats for our cars in a fair trade factory in South Korea or China or wherever that is. And the ultimate goal would be to have more and more and more people to think about these things in broader terms. And I mean, as I think about it for myself, I mean, when my kids start looking for jobs, I want them to get a job that pays them decently, that looks after their welfare, makes sure they're safe. People in China want exactly the same thing. And so how do we bring those things together and make sure that, I mean, right now, you know, we're the consumers in the world. We have money to spend. And we take it to places like China and Vietnam and the Philippines and Peru. And unfortunately right now, a lot of those people work for very little money, and we tend to take advantage of that. How do we raise the bar a little bit and say, let's care about the person who sews my shirt in Guatemala. Let's care about the person who makes the dashboard that goes in my car in China. And
do you have confidence that people, in fact, do have that thought? Because sometimes when you see people rushing for Black Friday goods, you know, it just looks like they just want the consumer items no matter what, no matter where they were made. So
well, not everybody will, but I think you need more and more people who are involved at the production and the organization and sort of the retailing level who care about that. And then, you know, they can influence other people to act that way as well. And the consuming public will come along. I mean, it's things like the environment and, I mean, the green movement, the organic, that was extremely small 20 years ago.
And we have just a minute left, and we have some pictures of you visiting in the field and with artisan groups. Talk a little bit about what this experience has been like for you to see transformation or change within a community that's
oh, it's been absolutely fantastic. When I was in Bangladesh just 2 weeks ago, I met a number of women that I knew 20 years ago who were beggars when I first met them. Today they are homeowners, they have children that have college education. One of the women that I visited, her oldest daughter is a medical doctor today in Bangladesh, and fantastic transformation for their family. And this was when I first met, the girl's name is Aya. She's a medical doctor. She was a little kid begging on the street when I first met her, and no hope for education whatsoever. She ended up being a doctor. It was fantastic.
Well, we'll talk a little bit more about those stories in our web extra. You saw our website just recently on air. If you'd like to learn more about the Fair Trade movement, you can go there. We'll have some links. I'd like to thank Doug Dirks, my guest today with 10,000 Villages, for being on Dialogue, and thanks as usual to you for tuning in.
Presentation of Dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho. Check out our website, like us on Facebook, or follow us on Twitter.